On today's episode of Military Vehicles versus Your Bank Account, we spend more quality time working on the Deuce. So the weather has improved from cold and snowy to cold and rainy, and it's about time to start tearing that injection pump apart. Now the easiest way I've seen is to rip the entire fender off. All those bolts, those should come right out. No problem. So after trying to find all of the terribly accessible fasteners on here, we got a plan B. Hate cutting up a mint condition fender, but we're going to put an access port right about there. At least the brakes are still free. Probably should take some of those sharp edges off. So the first plan is to pull that cover there and try and get the gear, that little red notch, aligned with the top dead center mark, and then we can start pulling off all the injection lines. Once the injection lines are off, then we can pull the hydraulic head out of there and see if that button is indeed missing in action. I've had this cover off one other time. We're using a period correct screwdriver, of course. And I just cut myself. But that is out of the way. Those are nice and sharp too. Better double up on the tetanus shots. We'll just wing that up out of the way. Now the good news is the arm, everything moves as it should, but we're going to get in there and replace all of the O-rings while we have the hydraulic head removed. So yeah, the arm moves free. We got to cut those safety wires, remove a clip, try not to lose any parts. Safety wire disengaged. Definitely in there a bit tighter than I was expecting. Alright, let's see if this comes out. Oh, there it is. So we was able to get that out without losing that little thing, and the O-ring came with it. Definitely a little bit of grunge buildup. So you're supposed to somehow roll this thing over by hand, the engine that is, with a bar, to get the red notch to align with that arrow. We're going to try and get really lucky and just tap the starter to bring it into alignment. Now just bump it. You don't have, yeah, well, hit it a quick again. Actually, it's almost there. Alright. Well, that's about as close as we're going to get it. Taking off all the injection lines. And apparently 11/16 was the last flare nut wrench that I had not made. Everything was going fine until that one nut wouldn't come loose. So here is the pump. And what is missing? No button. There it is. Maybe. Now, surprisingly enough, the clip does not look broken. And I was going to show you what the button looked like, but we dropped it. There it is. So we moved over to our clean room workbench, gave it the full rebuild here. Don't worry, we're going to hit it with a bunch of ATF for some lubrication here after we get all the little bit of grunge out of it. Now, I was really surprised to find that there was no broken pieces here, and this even sort of snapped pretty tightly back onto the pump. Probably not the right thing, but we gave each one of these little tangs just an ever so slight bend to make it grip just a bit more firm. I'm going to end up ordering an extra one of these to keep in the truck though anyways, in case this happens again. Everything else looks to be pretty clean and pretty good shape. I mean, the plunger even works pretty smooth. We're going to replace these O-rings. Hard to find anything blatantly wrong other than the button falling off. So the theory that I most believe to be what happened to that button there is most likely when the engine was shut off, the plunger was stopped in the up position, up compressed, and over time that grunge or bad fuel or whatever, it kind of got stuck there. And when you started the motor, when it should have dropped and followed the cam, it probably stayed suspended up here like this, and then all of a sudden, once the cam was down lower than it and it kind of had a space to free fall, it probably snapped shut and just fell so quick that it kind of basically threw the button off, and that's how it basically lost the button with no damage to any parts. It would make sense that that happened after the motor had been sitting for a couple of months while I was working on the brakes. Alright, this is a two-hander. There it is. Starting to go back together. Gotta clean some of the grunge off of those lines. Maybe blow them out with air. Now here's something interesting. If you look way back in there, that little sliding block, it has a groove. And right now it's centered within that hole. Before I took it apart, it was down at the bottom side of it. I believe that may be a way to tell if the button has fallen off of the bottom of the hydraulic head before you remove the whole thing. Makes sense that it would be centered in there. And when it dropped down low enough, that's why we weren't getting enough stroke on the internal piston to get the pressure we needed. Got some new safety wire for the retention screws. So we got the arm on there, tightened these up just snug. It still moves freely. Might have to put some more safety wire on, but we're going to test run it as is for now. All back together now. Moment of truth. Got the intake unhooked here and a, really great chip container lid. In case we need to block things off if it runs away. Period correct battery charger. Take care of your car at Kmart. Alright. Now the ignition, power is on. And there's a problem. That fuel pump ain't running. So we got the 13/16 fuel pump tool. Anybody home? We verified it's getting power. Starting to think maybe this fuel we got in here is something pretty vile. Allegedly, when I got it, supposedly had some fresh fuel in it, but I guess that's going on 2 years now. Normally, diesel doesn't go bad. But if things keep randomly seizing up and basically getting varnished up or something, there's got to be more to the story. If you want to disable that annoying buzzer, there's a wire end right there, and that box is the buzzer. Probably not advised by safety standards. Well, alright, back to the workbench. Now this is the 24 volt variant of this style pump, but I've run these old Carters in quite a bit of gasoline applications. I forget the exact number on them, but I use them as lift pumps, I use them as carburetor pumps. They're made in the USA and they're not terribly expensive. And the good thing about them is you can actually take them apart, and one thing people don't often realize, there's an actual little screen down in here. I'll show you here in a second. And that screen can get clogged up if you don't have a good pre-filter, but you can fix it. Top cap's held in by the studs, and there's a gasket under here, and there's that screen. Now what often happens is the screen right here lines up with the intake port. That'll get clogged up first, and then slowly it'll spread to the whole way around it. You've got a ground thrust plate here that the impellers ride on. And there is your drive and impellers. Now this is on a little bit of a spring, and I was able to all of a sudden get things moving here. Seemed like the motor might have been a little bit bound up, or who knows, had a little bit of varnish maybe just getting it stuck. All you gotta do is pop the cap, spray a little bit of WD in there, maybe some ATF. I bet you she'll chooch again. Hit it. Alright, crank it over a little bit. Alright, try it again. Hit it some more. Just give it a little bit of throttle. Alright, hit it. Hold it, shut it off. Hard to tell if the smoke's coming from the starter or from the exhaust. Alright, try it again. Hold up. I'll try it one more time. Yeah. It's diesel smoke. All right. Alright, let me get a little bit of ether. A little bit will do you. Alright, try it. Got something. Alright, hit it. Well, we have an air leak somewhere. We gotta find it. So the regular filter we had in there wasn't quite cutting it for diesel usage. So we got one of the Wix metal screen style, plumbed that in, and then we also added a bypass line. What that's gonna do is, that's a check valve. If the pump there, the lift pump, ever dies, it can still draw fuel around it without completely blocking all the flow. I actually had it happen on my 12 valve at one point when the lift pump died. The truck basically just started shutting off, and you would have had to manually disconnect and bypass the lift pump to keep it running. So this should, in the case of an electric lift pump failure, keep it running. So we've graduated from the old quarts to gallons of oil at this point. All the axles are going to get some fresh gear lube. Well, believe it or not, we're actually taking the old school canister style oil filters and upgrading them to the more modern spin-off type. Holy crap, are these expensive. My head's lighter than my wallet. The main reason for even going to this style filter is because these have the anti-drain back valve in them. When you fire up the Deuce, it takes like 8 seconds to get oil pressure, which is, well, very disturbing, and this is supposed to help a lot with that. These things drain completely empty, so you've got 2 of these canisters that have to fill full of oil before you get any oil pressure. Doing a proper rebuild on the battery cable. So the first test drive, after getting everything back running order, changing the fluids and the diffs, making sure all the brakes were in adjustment once more, all that seemed to work well and stop well. Thought we was really home free on everything. One further addition to the brakes, we added that remote reservoir, which you can see and constantly monitor the level without having to open up that freaking hatch in the floor and manually pull the cap off of the master cylinder. It's just plumbed in with a hose, and there's a barb fitting that goes through the cap on the master cylinder. Some further drivability mods. That little dim light down here on the turn signal, you usually forgot about it, and you can't hear anything clicking, so you just got in the old man mode and left your turn signals on wherever you went. So we tapped into the power of where that light bulb used to be. Basically, we took an old light bulb, smashed it, and then soldered the wires down into the contacts. Didn't really want to hack up any of the stuff here. So we got those wires coming out now, and we led them into a blindingly bright LED strip and an annoyingly loud buzzer down there. Now, I've actually had to unhook the buzzer because when you run these things on 24 volt, holy crap are they loud. And the LEDs are also very bright when they're ran on 24 volts, so you kind of lose your night vision when you're trying to drive in the dark. But by golly, you never forget to turn your turn signals off. But after we started putting a bit of miles on this thing, there was kind of being a problem started arising with the fuel delivery. I believe it's the fuel delivery. First 10-15 minutes that you drive this thing, everything's fine. You're cruising along. I mean, this is no hot rod to begin with, but power seemed adequate enough. After about 10-15 minutes, you can tell the power just starts slightly dropping off. It's getting harder and harder to try and maintain road speeds. Well, not like the speedometer works anyways. And after about 20 to 30 minutes of running, you can definitely tell you've got decreased top end. It's almost starting to surge a little bit under sustained high throttle loads. And being that AAA is not going to just pick this thing up on the side of the road, I was starting to get concerned that we'll be getting stranded at some point when the fuel delivery finally stops. So we are back to the fuel system again, trying to figure out what's the best way to make sure we finally solve this fuel delivery issue. One simple thing that I've definitely kind of not thought about putting in yet, but I should, is a fuel pressure gauge somewhere in the cab, so we can monitor the fuel pressure up above the lift pump here to see how much we're actually getting to the injection pump up there. I mean, fuel filters are definitely something we're going to change again, even though they're almost new. But there's conflicting reports on if these lift pumps actually supply enough flow and pressure to the injection pump. The in-tank ones were originally submerged. I'm sure they were higher flow than what we're trying to run there. Maybe we actually have to go back to the original style to try and get full power delivery here. But these pumps are not cheap, and they're hard to find. Really don't feel like spending $500 or $600 on something. Oh, and it's also developed a random short or bad connection somewhere when you drive it for a while. The headlights will flicker on and off, and even when those aren't on, the voltage meter will start bouncing all over the place, especially when you hit bumps. So that's fun. So that about does it for this season. We're going to throw the batteries on charge, do a couple extra prep things. We've got the auxiliary roof engaged, and then we'll try and figure things out next year. Because procrastination solves everything, right?